Hello, friends. Okay, so I had a question about working with the translations of sine and cosine. So to do something with like weird numbers. So I'm going to graph this today. Okay, so I've talked about this in my lesson video, and I really broke down kind of how to pick apart all the pieces of this kind of graph. So the first thing that I want to know is my amplitude, my phase shift, and my period. So my amplitude is just going to be this number in front of sine. So my amplitude is going to be 5 over 2. And then, so my phase shift in this case, so you'll notice that this particular equation, so again, I break this down more in my lesson video. When your equation is factored as it is in this form, the phase shift, actually, we don't have to do like a lot of work. It's just this x plus this. So when it's in this factored form, it's just going to be the pi over 4. So it's just going to be pi over 4. And then the period. So the period is found by taking 2 pi over this number that you can factor out. So we always want to kind of have this factored form, as we talked about in the last video. And so then the number that you factor out here, that goes underneath. So my period is going to be pi over 2. Okay, so cool. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to know, where do I start and end this graph? And to start and end the graph, so you always kind of set up the same idea. So I'm going to have, I go from 0 to 2 pi, but what goes in between is whatever is inside of my sine function. So I've got 4 times x plus pi over 4, and then that's less than 2 pi. So I always wedge this part in between 0 and 2 pi, and then I solve this 3-part inequality so that I can figure out where I start and I end. So in this case, I'm going to have to distribute, and then I can subtract off my pi. So I get negative pi is less than or equal to 4x less than or equal to pi, and then divide all sides by 4. Negative pi over 4 less than or equal to x less than or equal to pi over 4. Okay, so a note that I want to make, because we use homework software in my class, and I think some students are like reading the explanations of the homework software. So if you know me from my videos at this point, you know I'm kind of anti having like a bunch of extra formulas to remember. So I think like you could read a book that talks about like all these different ways that you can figure out where you start and you end, but this is the essence. Just put the equation between 0 and 2 pi and solve for it. So if you're reading like other explanations, you know, that could happen sometimes in math, but I'd rather just give you the guts of it and then you just figure it out, versus having some other magical formula that's like another thing that you have to remember. Okay, so this is where I'm going to start. This is where I'm going to end. And then what are the steps going to be from here to here? Well, to get to that, I take my period and I divide it by 4. So if I take pi over 2 and I divide that by 4, so that's going to end up giving me pi over 8 steps. Okay, so I think we've got everything we need to get this party started, so let's keep going. Okay, so I always like to start with of course, the starting point, right? That was the whole point of that exercise. So the starting point, again, that was this work here. So I'm going to start at negative pi over 4, and then I'm going to take pi over 8 steps. So I'm going to start at negative pi over 4, and so I want to just outline what are the steps that are going to go in this table before I go any farther. And this always works out to be 5 steps. So I'm going to start with negative pi over 4, and then so negative pi over 4 is equivalent to negative 2 pi over 8. And then I can add that pi over 8 step to it. So that's going to equal negative pi over 8. Okay. Then if I add pi over 8 to this, I get 0. If I add pi over 8 to this, I get pi over 8. And then if I add pi over 8 one more time, I get 2 pi over 8, which comes out to pi over 4. So check it out. That is, remember, that was the last step, right, that we wanted here when we did this. So I have 5 steps in this table now that I can figure out. And sorry, this is all kind of cattywampus or something. Okay, so now we need to figure out the y values. So let me clear some space. Okay, so here's the thing. Don't let this, like I know these look like intimidating numbers, but all the work that we do to set this up is intentionally going to make the calculations much easier. So sometimes like people's brains are going to panic when they see this, but you're strategic in how you're setting it up so that it will work out okay. So let's prove that. So I've got 5 over 2 sine of, well, let's simplify this to just 4x plus pi. Does that sound good to you? So I'm just going to distribute this in, it's 4. So let's call this the equation now. Okay. So now I'm going to plug in negative pi over 4. So if I plug that in, okay, so look at what happens. When I work this out, I get negative pi plus pi. So I just get 5 over 2 times sine of 0. Sine of 0 we know is just 0, so this just equals 0. Okay, this is exactly what we have designed. So it looks all intimidating, but the more of these graphs that you do, and I really advocate for you to always set up this table, you're going to notice a pattern with this, and then you're going to start to get pretty confident. But you have to go through this same process every time. Okay, so let me clear some space and we'll keep going. Okay, so now we're going to do negative pi over 8. Okay, so if I just work this out, so this comes out to negative pi over 2 plus pi. So now I've got sine of just pi over 2. So that's going to give me 5 over 2 times 1. So that's just going to be 5 over 2. Okay, cool. So up next we have 0. So if I plug 0 into this, so can you see what that's going to equal? Maybe pause and try to finish the rest of these just so that you can, like, if this is kind of freaking you out, like give this an actual try so that you can see how this all pans out really nicely, and then hit play when you're ready. Okay, so like I said, so next I've got 0. So this will just work out to be just sine of pi. Sine of pi once again is 0, so this whole thing just equals 0. Okay. And then what about if I do pi over 8? So let me just, I'll just flash up the work here to save time in the video. So when I plug in pi over 8, so then I get this will simplify to pi over 2 plus pi, so I just get sine of 3 pi over 2. That's negative 1 times 5 over 2, so this just equals negative 5 over 2. And then what about pi over 4? So I'll just flash the work up again. So let me clear some space and I'll show you the work. So then if I plug in pi over 4, so you can pause the video to read the work if you want, but you'll ultimately get 5 over 2 times sine of 2 pi. Sine of 2 pi is just 0, so this whole thing equals 0. So these are the 5 points that I really just need to graph on, you know, like my graphing software. So if I'm doing this with homework software, these are the 5 points that you want to put in. And so let's see. Let me draw a graph. Okay, so the scale of your graph is going to kind of matter here. So I've got my scale set up. So just everything could look a little more bunched depending on what your scale is like. And so then if I just start, you know, plotting my points here, so here's negative pi over 4. At negative pi over 8, so that's right about here, I'm going to have 5 halves, so I'll set that there. And then I have 0, 0, and then I have negative pi over 8 and negative 5 over 2, and then I have pi over 4, 0. So now I've set enough points that I can continue this pattern. So if I wanted to continue this, so I could go up here, and then I could come back down here, and then maybe, so let's see, so I've got this pattern going, whoop, 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 whoop. So you can continue it on both ways, right? So then I could go this way and this way, whoop, whoop. Make your own sound effects if you want. Okay, so that's everything that goes into that. And the key to this is that you have to get the 5 points to set this up. If you are not doing this, then this is just going to become so much harder. And the best way to get to these 5 points is to do this process. So list your amplitude, your phase shift, your period. You're going to use your period to determine how many steps you have. And then you're going to set up this equation every single time and solve for it. So you always want to do those things. Okay, so if you have more questions, of course, you can always send them my way. And I will talk to you guys next time.